You feel the cold bite of iron against your throat. The crowd's murmur rises like a wave, pressing against your skin. Your hands are bound so tight the rope burns, and you smell it, the metallic tang of blood from whoever came before you mixed with the Thames morning fog. The executioner asks your forgiveness. His voice shakes. You know what that means. He's new, untested, and your death won't be clean. Behind you, someone whispers a prayer you can't quite hear over the pounding of your own heart. The wooden platform creaks beneath your knees. You're trying to remember what your mother's face looked like. You can't. All you can see is the axe, and all you can think is, how many times will he have to swing it? Then you hear footsteps. Someone's running. Is it a pardon? I'm always curious who's watching these dark chapters of history. Drop a comment from wherever you are. It's wild to think this story reaches from London to Lagos, connecting us across centuries and continents through our fascination with the past. This is the Tower of London, but not the tourist attraction you know today. This is 1541, and these stones don't just witness history, they drink it. For over 900 years, this fortress has served as palace, prison, and killing ground where England's most powerful families sent their enemies to die. The tower wasn't designed for mercy. William the Conqueror built it in 1078 with walls 15 feet thick, not just to keep invaders out, but to keep prisoners in. Those who entered through the Traitors' Gate rarely left alive. The Watergate's steps, worn smooth by centuries of condemned feet, still descend into the Thames. But this isn't a story about architecture. This is about the humans who perfected death here, who turned execution into an art form with rules, rituals, and mistakes that would haunt witnesses for life. Inside these walls, executioners developed techniques so brutal that even hardened soldiers would turn away. The tower's execution records began in 1242. Over 600 years, thousands would die here. Some deaths took seconds, others took hours. And the methods used reveal something darker than history books admit: how creative humans become when tasked with ending life. Before dawn on one particular morning, an executioner would make an error that haunted him until his own death. A letter discovered in the Tower archives in 1862 would reveal the psychological cost these men paid. And the last execution here, in 1941, would connect ancient stone to modern warfare in ways no one expected. Richard Brandon inherited death from his father. Not a metaphor, the position of king's executioner was passed down like any trade. Gregory Brandon had wielded the axe for 30 years, and he taught his son everything: how to test the blade's edge on moistened rope, how to position the condemned so their neck stretched taut, how to drink enough ale the night before to steady your hands, but not so much you'd miss the mark. Richard practiced on sheep, then pigs, then, when he was ready, on men. His first execution was in 1632. The prisoner was a horse thief named Thomas Walton, sentenced to hang at Tower Hill. Richard performed the job cleanly, professionally. He went home that night and couldn't eat for 3 days. His wife, Mary, wrote in her diary, "He sees their faces in every shadow." But Richard was skilled. So skilled that by 1649 Parliament chose him for the most significant execution in English history. King Charles I, they offered him £30 equivalent to 3 years' wages. Richard accepted, but he wore a mask, a fake beard, and made his brother sign the death warrant in his place. The execution went perfectly. One clean stroke. The king died instantly. Richard lived for 6 more months. He died screaming that the king's ghost was choking him. His last words, recorded by his priest: "I see him nightly, and he asks me why." Within the tower, executioners lived in isolation. They couldn't attend church with regular parishioners. Taverns wouldn't serve them. But they weren't monsters, they were professionals trapped in a profession that devoured their souls. A handbook from 1597, discovered in the Tower archives, reveals their protocols. Fast before execution. Pray for strength. Ask the condemned's forgiveness. Test your blade thrice before the fatal stroke. And never, ever look them in the eyes afterward. But what happened when an executioner couldn't perform cleanly? when the blade missed, when a condemned noble refused to kneel. May 27th, 1541. Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, is 78 years old. She's being executed not for anything she did, but because she's too close to the royal bloodline and Henry VIII fears her family's claim to the throne. She spent 2 years in the Tower, and she knows what's coming. They lead her to the scaffold at dawn. But Margaret refuses to kneel. "I am no traitor," she says. "If you want my head, you must take it as you can. The executioner is new. His name is lost to history, but his incompetence isn't. He's been practicing for weeks, but never on a prisoner who fought back." Margaret sees his hands shaking. She starts to run. What happens next is documented by 3 separate witnesses, and their accounts match. The executioner chases the elderly countess around the scaffold, hacking at her with his axe. The first blow strikes her shoulder. The second misses entirely. The third catches her neck, but doesn't sever it. By the 5th stroke, she's on the ground. By the 8th, witnesses are vomiting. The 11th finally kills her. The execution was supposed to be private, limited to official witnesses, but Tower guards heard the screams. Prisoners in the Salt Tower heard them. Londoners on the southern bank of the Thames claimed they heard them echoing across the water. The Tower's priest, Father Hugh Latimer, refused to perform last rites for the executioner afterward. "God may forgive him," Latimer wrote. "I cannot." The axe from that execution was destroyed, burned. The replacement cost 7 shillings, a sum the Crown complained about in expense records. That's what Margaret Pole's dignity was worth to Tudor England. 7 shillings for a new axe because the old one was too cursed to touch. The executioner abandoned his post that night. Some records suggest he fled to a monastery in Norfolk. Others claim he threw himself into the Thames. But Tower records do note this. The position of executioner stood vacant for 6 weeks afterward because no one would take it. This is the reality history books sanitize. Execution wasn't clean, it wasn't quick, and it wasn't merciful. Anne Boleyn knew she was dying. By May 17, 1536, she'd spent 17 days in the Tower, alternating between hysteria and eerie calm. She'd been convicted of adultery, incest, and treason, all false charges orchestrated by Thomas Cromwell and approved by the husband who'd once reshaped Christianity to marry her. But Henry VIII, perhaps feeling some remnant of the love that had consumed him for 7 years, granted her one final mercy. She would die by sword, not axe. Not an English executioner, but a master swordsman from Calais. His name was young Rambo. He'd executed over 100 people, and he'd never needed more than 1 stroke. He arrived in London 3 days early, staying at the sign of the Hangman Tavern near Tower Hill. The innkeeper's daughter, Alice Warren, kept a diary. Her entry from May 16th. "The Frenchman barely speaks. He brought his sword wrapped in black velvet. At night I hear him in his room, practicing the swing. The sound of the blade cutting air makes me shiver. Rambo charged £23 for his services, the price of a small house, but Henry paid without question." Some historians claim guilt, others argue pragmatism. The spectacle of a botched execution could turn public sympathy toward Anne, and Henry couldn't risk that. May 19th, 8 a.m. Anne wore a gray damask gown, trimmed with fur, and a red petticoat red, the color of martyrdom. She'd asked her ladies to bind her hair up high, exposing her neck fully. "I heard say the executioner was very good," she told them, "and I have a little neck." Then she laughed. 1,500 people couldn't attend. This execution was private, limited to official witnesses. But Tower Constable Sir William Kingston's report survives, and it's detailed. Anne knelt upright, without a block. She refused a blindfold. She prayed in English, then French, then closed her eyes. Rambo had hidden his sword beneath straw on the scaffold. While Anne prayed, he signaled his assistant to call out, "Where is the sword?" Anne turned her head toward the voice. In that moment of distraction, Rambo drew the blade and swung in one fluid motion. Her head fell before her lips stopped moving in prayer. Kingston wrote, I have seen many men die, but never did I see such courage. The entire execution, from Anne's arrival on the scaffold to her death, took 6 minutes. But here's what the official accounts don't mention. Anne's ladies-in-waiting had to place her head and body in an arrowed chest because no coffin had been prepared. The Queen of England, for whom Henry had broken with Rome, was buried in an unmarked grave beneath the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula. Her ladies wept as they arranged her body in the crude box. Rimbaud left London the next day. He never spoke of the execution publicly, but a letter discovered in Calais archives in 1924 reveals his thoughts. Written to his brother 2 weeks after Anne's death, Rimbaud wrote, "I have ended the life of many wicked men, but she was not wicked. She died with such grace that I will carry her face to my own grave. I dream of her nightly, not in nightmare, but in sorrow, for I have killed something rare and precious, and I did not choose to do so. The gold they paid me burns my hands." Anne Boleyn's execution was considered the gold standard. Quick, clean, dignified, but even in its perfection, it carried a weight that broke something in the man who performed it. The Tower's execution scaffold wasn't a permanent structure on Tower Hill. It was built new for each execution, then dismantled. Carpenter John Ripley held the contract from 1536 to 1548, and his account books survive in the British Library. They reveal the grim economics of death. 1 scaffold, 47 oak planks, 650 iron nails, 4 support beams. Cost, £4 8s. Assembly time, 14 hours. Ripley charged extra if the execution was postponed 1 shilling per day for storage of materials. When Lady Jane Grey's execution was delayed by 2 days in February 1554, Ripley made an additional 2 shillings. The wood couldn't be reused for anything else. Superstition ran too deep. After each execution, the blood-stained planks were either burned or thrown into the Thames. Ripley's accounts note selling them to desperate poor families for firewood at reduced prices. "They burned the scaffold from the Rochford execution," reads one entry from 1542. 2 shillings gained. Though the buyer crossed herself thrice before taking delivery, the block itself was more valuable. Carved from solid English oak, each block took 3 days to craft and cost £2. The curved depression that cradled the condemned's neck required expert carpentry. Too shallow, and the head would slip. Too deep, and the axe might embed in wood rather than completing its cut. Deep beneath the White Tower, execution blocks were once stacked like forgotten furniture. Each was wrapped in cloth and marked with the name of the person who had died upon it. During renovations in the 19th century, workers uncovered dozens of these wooden slabs, some still bearing carved inscriptions. One reportedly belonged to the Duke of Clarence, the nobleman long rumored to have been drowned in wine, suggesting his end may have been far less theatrical than legend claims. Yet the true damage of the Tower's killings was not measured in wood or iron, but in minds. Every execution rippled through the fortress staff. Guards marched prisoners to their deaths. Chaplains whispered final prayers they could never forget. Doctors verified lifeless bodies. Above all stood the constable of the Tower, legally required to witness each execution and sign that the sentence had been carried out. Sir William Kingston, constable in the 1530s, left behind private letters revealing the toll. He wrote of sleepless nights haunted by the faces of condemned queens. After Catherine Howard's execution, he confessed he no longer knew how to answer when prisoners asked if dying would hurt. Within a decade, the post of constable changed hands repeatedly. No one wanted a job that slowly crushed the soul. On August 15, 1941, the Tower claimed its final life. Joseph Jacobs, a German spy captured after a failed parachute landing, was sentenced to death. Too injured to stand, he was strapped to a chair in a rifle range. 8 soldiers fired together. It was over in moments, the swiftest, cleanest execution the Tower had ever seen. With that volley, a 900-year chapter of blood quietly closed. Today, millions of visitors flood the Tower. They photograph jewels, laugh with uniformed guides, and stroll across Tower Green. What they don't notice are the quiet reports filed by night. Guards, sudden drops in temperature, whispers in empty corridors, cameras failing on certain anniversaries. Some warders even speak of vivid dreams where they witness executions they never studied. And then there are the ravens. Their wings are clipped so they never leave. The public story says the kingdom would fall without them. Among their keepers, another belief survives. The birds remain not to protect Britain, but because they alone can stare at these ancient stones without seeing the dead who still linger there. They remember the sound, the wet thud of axe meeting flesh. They remember the silence that followed, that terrible moment when a body realizes it's dead. They remember that no one came to help, that crowds watched and cheered. And they made sure the world would remember too, by building a memorial that sanitizes everything, by turning horror into tourism, by making death pretty enough to visit on a Sunday afternoon. But there's one more thing the visitors don't know. You're back where we started. The cold bite of iron against your throat, the crowd's murmur, the smell of blood and Thames fog. But now you know why. Now you understand that this wasn't rare. For 900 years this was ordinary. For 900 years killing was a craft practiced in the shadows of power, where human life was currency and death was the exchange rate. The Tower of London still stands today. The execution block that killed 3 queens sits in the White Tower behind glass, its wood dark and smooth from centuries of touching. The ravens still circle overhead. And if you visit at dawn when the tourists haven't arrived yet, when the light catches the stones just right, you can still smell it, that metallic tang that never quite washes away. The stones remember. They always remember. And they're waiting to tell their stories to anyone who'll listen long enough to hear them scream.